1, 2, 3, 4. I got thoughts running through my head. I got thoughts, can't you see? I got thoughts, the books I read. I got thoughts, won't you listen to me?
Welcome back to The Author Has Thoughts. I am the author in question, Gary Ballard, and you are watching a video on my third novel, If Tribe Equals. There's already been I don't know how many parts before, but this is a continuation of that. Alright, so here's a big spoiler. Middle of the book. Bridge's senses returned slowly, a kaleidoscope of swirling images and swimming vision as he slowly regained consciousness. He ended up on his back with his attacker standing calmly over him. His limited perceptions could only focus on one thing at a time, and that thing was Angela. She was in her creche, and she wasn't moving. As clarity inexorably returned, the chain of events that led to this ordered themselves into a linear narrative that Bridge could comprehend. The creche, otherwise known as the Sukamura Sensory Deprivation Global Net Interface, was, for all intents and purposes, a sealed coffin-like environment. The user lay in its pill-shaped interior and had their senses removed one by one. A liquid suffused with a light anesthetic absorbed through the skin removed the sense of touch, covering the body, face, and head completely. Earplugs and an oxygen mask covered the face, eyes, and ears, cutting off sound, sight, and smell while providing oxygen. An intravenous drip provided nutrition on those long runs, and small electrodes provided tiny shocks that prevented muscular atrophy. A waist catch covered the genitals, removing the need for bio breaks. The creche was an environment that isolated consciousness from its earthly shell, and the Sukamura plug provided an avenue to the great data ocean that was the global net. Without electricity, the creche became a watery coffin in fact as well as in appearance. Bridge had experienced the jolt of power loss during the riots, and it had been terrifying. Oxygen stopped flowing, and water would begin seeping into the face mask without the slightest movement. All the senses that had been removed would fire back up instantly. Perception snapped from whatever fantastic vista the net body had been experiencing to the darkened claustrophobic feeling of being buried alive while also drowning. The best creche models, like the one Angela lay in, had multiple battery backups. All backups took seconds to warm up, enough time to extricate oneself from the creche before suffocation or drowning, precious seconds of sheer, thrashing, panic terror. The locks were designed to pop open as soon as power was interrupted, whether the backups engaged or not. Angela's model could have kept her in power for at least an hour after power loss, more than enough time to escape safely. Unless someone stopped her, that is. Bridge imagined her last moments. She could have held her breath a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes tops. She would have thrashed about initially, taking precious seconds getting her physical bearings without thinking there was any danger. She would have checked the power readouts glowing on the goggles that blocked her vision. Those readouts would have been dead, of course, because Bridge could tell, even now as he scooted back to lean heavily against the wall, that the backups had been disabled before the power had been cut. Angela would have immediately realized that the creche was dead in the water and moved her leaden arms to lift the lid. Bridge imagined the muffled, annoyed curses she would have tossed in the box, irritated at having her work interrupted. Even the first resistance to opening wouldn't have registered as dangerous through her peevish mood. Only when the lid had refused to budge after a second harder push would she have started to panic. A quick gasp would have caught in her throat, fogging the oxygen mask as she pulled the last scattered remnants of air from the interior. Water would have begun to seep in under the mask, and she would have tried to raise her head above the water line in that minuscule void space between the water level and the ceiling. But even the air would be fetid and scant, redolent with the scent of body odor, stale water, and the memory of electrical current. She might have lasted whole minutes that way, frantically slamming her hands against the coffin's lid, burning what little oxygen remained faster and faster with each second. Maybe she wouldn't have screamed a scream that would have been swallowed up by the thick casing. The carpet showed the signs of the creche having been moved after long months crushed down by the weight of the equipment, proving that she had struggled mightily. But it would have been in vain. Floating, exploding lights would have crept into the edges of her vision, followed by the dark textured shroud of unconsciousness crawling across her eyes. All would have gone dark, her eyes rolling back into her head as the last scrabbling breath left her body and her lungs strained to extract any solace from the air. She would have fainted finally, falling back into the water with mouth wide, water seeping into her mouth and nose and filling her dead lungs. Angela was dead. Bridge repeated the words over and over in his mind, unable to process the reality. Angela was dead. She was dead. That was her lifeless hand draped cruelly over the lip of the creche. Angela was dead. big spoiler there, I killed Angela in this book. And I kind of struggled with it just a little bit before deciding it because, one of the things that authors will do a lot of times in series is that to shock is, oh, I'm going to kill a character. George R. R. Martin did a lot, so it became not so much of a shock once the Red Wedding was done. But, so that's kind of your way of, as an author, saying, hey, this shit's for real. And I wanted to kill a character. I knew that when I started the book, I wanted somebody had to suffer the consequences of something. I didn't want to make it Aristotle because, I don't want to be accused of, you killed the black guy. Like in horror movies, the black guy's always the first one to die. But I also thought, there's something more to him. And I settled on Angela because, number one, it felt like she didn't necessarily have much of a character arc. She was who she was, and she wasn't not going to change. But also because that would be the one that would hit Bridge the most. It would be the closest to whatever he calls a heart. And the reason ends up being that this assassin comes after them is because of what happened in Boulder. Bridge already had some guilt for the soldier he hit with a car at the end of there, but he didn't really necessarily have a lot of guilt for those 30,000 people. It was there, but it was kind of like it's such a large number and something that he had so little to do with that it doesn't penetrate, especially to a guy like Bridge, who doesn't really feel guilt or doesn't allow himself. Bridge doesn't allow himself to feel guilt. The death needed to be something that was personally painful to Bridge, but that, and again, Angela didn't have much of an arc that I thought of. And I'm sure I could have thought of one, and there's actually some pieces that are still left around that could be an arc, as it were. But, that was the one that felt right. And nobody's ever actually reacted to that much, whether surprised or not. So I guess it came off perfectly fine. But, I wanted to use that, and I'm still using it to this day in some of the books, as Bridge's kind of his connection to guilt, to human feeling, to empathy, that he doesn't want people to see because he thinks they would perceive it as weakness. And, based on the people he would be talking to, they probably would perceive it as weakness. But, later on in the book, Bridge almost has kind of a panic attack and goes and washes his face in a convenience store bathroom and says, looks in the mirror and says, you killed her. You're the reason she's dead. So he's taking full responsibility for it. But it was, some unknown corporation had sent the assassin to find Bridge to find out more about what had happened in Boulder, and is that related to the Technomancers, and how does Bridge relate to that? So that ends up his, setting up the Technomancers and all that, ends up costing him Angela. Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself.